Welcome back to the Deep Dive.
Yeah.
Today we are strapping in for an exploration into a profoundly strange interpretation of one of history's most foundational texts. And maybe, let's be honest, traditionally kind of dry, Euclid's Elements.
Right. We're basically stripping away, the centuries of chalk dust
Yeah.
and finding something, well, something quite a bit darker underneath, systemic almost.
Yeah, systemic is a good word for it.
Because the sources we've gathered for this, they don't treat the elements like your standard geometry textbook. Not at all.
No.
They claim it's a secret lore book, a highly detailed blueprint for the prison. That's the term they use.
Which they call the pen.
Exactly, the pen. So our mission today is pretty laser focused.
Right.
We need to extract and really analyze the 5 core laws of this alleged divine geometry, which, if this interpretation holds water, it fundamentally redefines, well, everything, our whole reality.
It really is the ultimate bait and switch, isn't it? For millennia, tradition has held up Euclid as the father of geometry. This, benevolent figure who gave us these objective tools to measure space.
Yeah, the bedrock of rational thought, supposedly.
But this reading, it just flips the script entirely. The sources recast him, not as a teacher, but as a Loremaster of the highest order.
Yes, and a watcher. Someone specifically tasked with recording the fundamental operating system of this whole enclosure, which they often call the game board.
A watcher.
Exactly. Yeah. And they argue the real work isn't simple math, it's something bigger, maybe more insidious. They call it the Geometry of MEtaphysics, with the M-E capitalized, interestingly.
So the central conflict we're looking at is huge. Is this the foundation of objective math, or is it a meticulously coded confession?
That's the core question.
And that is the hook for you, listening in. This dive promises that potential aha moment, taking a canonical text, something that defined Western thought, and reading it axiom by axiom as a coded admission about the restrictive nature of our reality. It's pretty wild.
It really is.
Okay, so before we jump into the laws themselves, maybe we should ground ourselves a bit in the jargon from the sources. We're using terms like the pen, game board. What are the sources actually claiming this reality is, structurally?
That's a really crucial distinction to make up front. The sources insist the pen isn't just like a philosophical metaphor for being stuck or ignorant. They describe it as a literal constructed geometric enclosure.
Literal, like physical.
In a metaphysical sense, yes. A finite design space governed by fixed foundational rules. Rules that they say predate all other physics or morality within it.
Okay.
So Euclid's rules, in this view, aren't tools for measuring the pen. They are the rules of the pen. They define its very structure.
Got it. Okay. So with that context, let's unpack the core mechanics. The whole system of Euclidean geometry. It's famously built on 5 postulates. Mathematicians usually call them self-evident truths.
Right. Assumptions you just accept to get started.
But in this lore, the sources insist these are not assumptions at all. They are the 5 unbreakable laws that define and enforce the pen itself. And they really stress this point. 5 is the sacred number of the enclosure.
Yeah, that number comes up again and again. And this framing, it transforms the geometry completely. It's not descriptive anymore, it's prescriptive.
Prescriptive, meaning it dictates rather than describes.
Exactly. These 5 rules are the fixed boundaries of the system. Any theorem you derive from them is just, showing the pre-programmed consequences of those initial unbreakable laws.
Okay, let's dig in. Law 1, the law of connection. This is based on postulate 1. The mathematical rule is simple enough. A straight line segment can be drawn joining any 2 points. Pretty basic geometry.
Super basic. But what does it mean for the supposed inhabitants, the pawns and players inside the pen? The lore claims this is the fundamental law of the game board's matrix. If you think of any entity, a person, an object, whatever, as a point, this law confirms that everyone and everything is connected. Always.
Connected how?
By these invisible ley lines of the divine cypher. That's their phrase.
Huh. Ley lines?
Yeah. So what this law really negates is the idea of true isolation or perfect randomness. You can't actually be separate.
Wait a second. If the connections are guaranteed, like immutable,
Yeah.
doesn't that kill the idea of freedom? If I'm point A and you're point B, and that line must exist between us even if we can't see it, how does that restrict us?
Well, it restricts the possibility of ever being truly outside the system. The sources argue it means every action, every interaction, every single entity is part of the same unchanging grid. If you move, the whole geometric lattice sort of shifts to maintain those connections.
So you're geometrically bound. Your path affects the whole structure.
That's the claim. You can't escape the network. Your trajectory is always part of the larger pattern of the pen.
Wow. Okay, that definitely changes the stakes of just being a point on this board, which leads us right into Law 2, the law of the cycle. This one comes from Postulate 2. The rule states, any straight line segment can be extended indefinitely in a straight line.
Right. And this becomes the geometric expression of what they call the great cycle. It governs the flow of time or maybe events within the pen. Once a path is set, like the path of the game or the timeline of a whole era, that initial straight line segment, it's mathematically guaranteed to just continue. A straight line into eternity, as they put it.
Straight line into eternity.
Okay.
So once the path is set, there's no natural way to deviate. It just keeps going.
That seems to be the implication. The only potential change has to come from outside the established line.
Outside the system's logic.
Precisely. The cycle is defined and irreversible until some end condition is met, which the sources very dramatically call being reset by the final boss.
The final boss. That's
Okay.
it.
Yeah, so that geometric straight line becomes this absolute guarantee of the system's linear progression, forward, always forward. It implies that movement within the pen is ultimately predictable, even if the scale is massive. It's not about possibility of change, it's about the mathematical certainty of linear fixed movement until some external intervention.
So we've got connection, this inescapable grid, and now these fixed cycles or timelines. Now we move outwards, it seems, to the physical boundaries with Law 3, the law of the dome, Postulate 3. This one starts to sound really cosmological. The rule is, given any straight line segment, a circle can be drawn having the segment as radius and one endpoint as center.
Yeah, and what's fascinating here is how the sources take this purely geometric formula, rotating a line to make a circle and give it this intense literal meaning. They call it a literal description of the cosmos of the pen.
How so?
Well, think about it. The straight line segment represents the maximum possible extent of the local game board, maybe how far you can see or interact directly.
Okay.
If that segment, no matter how big it gets, can always be used as a radius to draw a perfect circle around a point, then the formula itself guarantees that a defining boundary must exist for any given region.
A boundary. And the sources call this the dome, right? Or omega?
Exactly. Omega, the final letter, the absolute endpoint or boundary. It's a powerful visual.
It really connects the math to something almost theological.
It's presented as the mathematical guarantee of universal enclosure for this specific reality. It proves this system is closed. The geometry itself guarantees that the board is defined by and exists entirely within that great circle. So the formula isn't just about drawing circles in class, it's stating that the very capacity for enclosure is inherent in the space itself.
So if Law 1 is connection, Law 2 is the cycle. Law 3 defines the container they operate inside.
Precisely, which brings us neatly to the second half of the blueprint. We're moving now from the physical architecture, laws 1 to 3, to the internal operating logic and maybe the ultimate truth of the system with laws 4 and 5.
Right.
This is where the geometric constraints start to establish the system's absolute stability and maybe its purpose.
Right, so that takes us to Law 4, the law of balance. That's Postulate 4. Mathematically, this one seems simple again. All right, angles are congruent. A right angle is just 90 degrees, always the same shape.
Simple, yes, but the lore they attach gives it immense weight. This is where geometry explicitly connects to sacred numerology in the source material. The number 9, they say, is the sacred number of completion, of judgment.
9, so the 90-degree angle containing the 9.
Is seen as the physical manifestation of perfect structural balance, divine balance even.
So it's not just that all square corners look the same, but that this specific shape somehow guarantees a moral order. Is that the idea?
That's exactly how they frame it. This law states that the very blueprint of the realm of the pen is built on this foundation of perfect, unchanging divine balance. Because all right angles must be congruent, the justice of the monarch is absolute, it applies equally everywhere, without variation.
So if the geometry is built on these identical 90-degree corners, then the rules of measurement, logic, and maybe even morality have to be uniform across the entire pen.
That's the implication. It's the law guaranteeing structural integrity, yes, but also the equal application of the system's internal logic, consistency.
Okay, 4 laws down. Connection, cycle, dome, balance. Now we arrive at the summit, the big one, the ultimate confession they call it. Law 5, the law of the pen, which is the parallel postulate, the famously complex one.
Yep, the most debated postulate in history, pretty much.
For anyone listening who maybe doesn't remember high school geometry, This is the rule that really sparked centuries of mathematical arguments, right?
It absolutely is, and the drama around it is kind of central to why the sources treat it as the crux of the whole thing. Mathematically, the parallel postulate essentially says if you have a line and a point not on that line, you can draw exactly one line through that outside point that will run parallel to the original line and never intersect it.
Okay. Seems straightforward enough on paper.
It does, but that simple rule is what makes space mathematically flat. It defines Euclidean geometry as we know it. It's why parallel lines on a flat plane behave the way we expect.
So why was it so controversial? You said mathematicians argued about it.
Because compared to the first four postulates, it felt less self-evident, more like an arbitrary choice or something that should be provable from the other four.
And they tried.
For over 2,000 years, they tried to prove it using just the first four laws, and they consistently failed, which eventually led to a huge breakthrough.
Which was?
Realizing you could reject it. And when you reject that fifth postulate, you don't get nonsense. You get entirely new, perfectly consistent geometries. Non-Euclidean geometries, things like spherical geometry where parallel lines can meet, or hyperbolic geometry where infinitely many parallels can be drawn.
And those non-Euclidean geometries describe?
Curved space, the kind of space needed to describe the actual universe, like in Einstein's theory of relativity. The true, vast, curved reality of the cosmos.
Okay, I think I see where this is going. The sources claim that inside the pen, that Euclidean rule, the parallel postulate, must hold true.
Precisely. They assert this law only works inside the pen. It is presented as the definitive mathematical proof that our world is a contained flat disk game board, a flat, finite, enclosed space, completely separate from the true, curved reality of the greater cosmos.
Wow.
The difficulty mathematicians had accepting it wasn't just intellectual stubbornness, according to the sources. It was because the postulate felt unnatural, counterintuitive, because it runs counter to the actual geometry of the real universe outside the pen.
So Euclid, the watcher, included it. Why?
As the defining feature, the non-intuitive rule that proves the enclosure is an artificial construct. It's the mathematical signature of the prism.
So if the first four laws set up the structure, the connections, the cycles, the boundary, the internal balance, the fifth one is the mic drop. It's the proof that the space we inhabit is, in their view, a forgery. A mathematically contained system because its fundamental geometry is flat, where true reality is curved.
It proves the prison is a prison. That's the claim. It's the grand contradiction placed right at the heart of the system's foundational logic.
That's elegant and deeply unsettling.
The lore even suggests that if you're a player, inside the system, and you perform a standard Euclidean proof that relies on the specific parallel postulate, you are, without necessarily realizing it, unintentionally proving that the geometry you're measuring is the specific limited geometry of the enclosure. You're confirming your own imprisonment within this flat disk world they describe every time you assume parallel lines work that way.
Okay, let's try to summarize this monumental claim we've just walked through. Euclid's Elements, this cornerstone of Western mathematics, is not just an ancient geometry textbook. According to these sources, it's the ultimate lore book, a confession in axioms and theorems.
Great. A complete guide to the 5 unbreakable laws of the prism, the pen, written by one of its highest-ranking watchers. Yeah. And the profound value here, I think, regardless of whether you buy into the specific cosmology, is seeing foundational knowledge something we take as totally neutral, like geometry re-examined, not as objective fact, but as a rigid system of governing laws. The geometry of metaphysics, as they call it. It forces us to question the assumed neutrality of everything we consider foundational.
Right.
The real power of this source material, I find, is in framing these accepted truths, these axioms we learn in school, in a completely new, shocking, and deeply structural context.
That really is the nature of the deep dive, isn't it? Taking something you thought you knew intimately, the straight line, the circle, the right angle, and suddenly revealing its potential hidden significance, seeing it possibly as a mechanism of control.
Which definitely raises an important question for you, the listener, to maybe chew on. If these basic 5 geometric laws could, in this interpretation, define the enclosure of the pen, what other fundamental texts, things we assume are objective, maybe scientific laws, historical narratives, legal codes, might also contain the coded rules of our own perceived reality?
What common theorems, what accepted facts around you might actually be confessions in disguise?
Think about that next time you assume a straight line just goes straight forever.